The U-Haul groaned to a halt in front of my beige-on-beige townhouse, looking as out of place in the meticulously manicured landscape of Harmony Glen as a punk rocker at a monastery. My cousin Tyler hopped out of the passenger seat, a wide grin splitting his face. Buster, his golden retriever service dog, bounded out after him, tail thwacking against the side of the truck like a furry metronome. "What do you think?" I signed, a little rusty but hopefully coherent. Tyler's cochlear implant helped him some, but ASL was still our go-to, especially when he was tired, and a cross-country drive definitely qualified as tiring. Tyler gave a thumbs up, his eyes scanning the identical houses lining the cul-de-sac. "It's uniform," he signed back, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Buster, as if sensing the need for some chaos in all this order, let out a happy bark and promptly sniffed a prize-winning rose bush with a little too much enthusiasm. Right on cue, a shadow fell over us. "Ahem!" I turned. Standing there, arms crossed, was a woman who looked like her face might crack if she smiled. She had a helmet of blonde hair that defied gravity and a visor that could double as a solar panel. This had to be her, Mrs. Henderson, or, as the hushed whispers on the community Facebook page called her, HOA Karen. "Welcome to Harmony Glen," she said, her voice as crisp as a starched collar. Her eyes, however, weren't on us. They were lasered onto Buster, who was now attempting to make friends with a garden gnome. "There's a strict no pets off leash policy and a noise ordinance. That barking will have to be curtailed." I stepped forward, plastering on my most charming, non-confrontational smile. It was a smile I'd perfected over years of trying to avoid conflict, a skill I was, unfortunately, rather good at. "Hi, I'm Jake. This is my cousin Tyler. And this is Buster. He's Tyler's hearing dog." Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed, flicking from Buster back to me. "Service animal, you say?" The skepticism dripped from her words. Tyler, bless his heart, stepped up. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice a little loud, a common thing. "He helps me. I'm deaf." He pointed to his implant. Buster, sensing the tension, sat politely by Tyler's side, looking the model of canine decorum. His official service vest was bright blue, clearly visible. Mrs. Henderson sniffed. "Well, the rules are the rules. Leash policy is absolute, and we have a community event this afternoon, a welcome summer barbecue. Attendance is strongly encouraged." She gave another pointed look at Buster. "Ensure he's on his best behavior. We don't want any incidents." With that, she pivoted on her sensible orthopedic shoes and marched off, leaving a trail of disapproval in her wake. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Well," I said, turning to Tyler, "welcome to the neighborhood." Tyler laughed, a genuine hearty sound. "She seems fun," he signed. "A barrel of laughs," I signed back, though a knot of unease was already forming in my stomach. I'm not a fighter. I'm a smooth things over. Let's all just get along kind of guy. My ex used to say I'd apologize to a door if I bumped into it. She wasn't wrong. But looking at Tyler, so excited for this new start after a rough few years, and Buster, who was already nudging his hand for a reassuring pat, I felt a flicker of something else. Something that felt suspiciously like a spine. We spent the next few hours unpacking. My townhouse wasn't huge, but it was a step up for Tyler, who'd been crashing on various family couches since his parents had moved overseas for work. He was starting a new job downtown as a graphic designer, and living with me was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for some stability. As we lugged boxes, Tyler told me more about his old apartment, the one where a clueless landlord had tried to evict him over Buster, not understanding the first thing about service animals, or the ADA. It had been a stressful, drawn-out fight that Tyler eventually won, but it had taken its toll. "That's why I'm so grateful for this, Jake," he said, pausing with a box labeled kitchen stuff. Fragile. Seriously, Tyler, fragile. A place where I don't have to fight just to have Buster with me. I clapped him on the shoulder. Hey, that's what family's for. And Harmony Glen might be a bit uptight, but they can't argue with federal law. Buster's not going anywhere. Oh, the irony. If only I'd known. Later that afternoon, showered and marginally less covered in dust, we headed to the community park for the Welcome Summer barbecue. It was a sea of pastel polo shirts and khaki shorts. Kids were running through sprinklers, and the air smelled of sizzling burgers and aggressively applied sunscreen. Buster, on his leash and sporting his service vest, trotted happily beside Tyler. He was a hit with the kids, who cautiously approached to ask if they could pet him. Tyler, always patient, explained that Buster was working and couldn't be distracted. Most parents nodded understandingly. I was just starting to relax, thinking maybe Mrs. Henderson was an anomaly when I saw her. She was holding court near the dessert table, a clipboard in hand, directing volunteers with military precision. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and I swear, they landed on Buster like a heat-seeking missile. I tried to steer Tyler towards the burger line, hoping to blend into the crowd. Food? I signed. But it was too late. Mrs. Henderson was bearing down on us. Excuse me, excuse me! Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through the cheerful chatter of the barbecue, like a weed whacker through daisies. People turned. Of course they did. She had that kind of voice. She stopped right in front of Tyler, completely ignoring me. Young man, I thought I made myself clear about the animal. Tyler looked taken aback. He's on his leash, ma'am. He's my service dog. Service dog or not, she snapped, her eyes flicking dismissively over Buster's vest. He's causing a disturbance. Some of the children are frightened. I looked around. The only children nearby were the ones who had moments before been asking to pet Buster, looking more curious than scared. One little girl was even giggling as Buster's tail wagged near her. I don't think he's frightening anyone, I said, trying to keep my voice even. My palms were starting to sweat. This was exactly the kind of confrontation I usually ran a mile from. I am the president of this homeowners association, Mrs. Henderson declared, puffing her chest out slightly. And I am responsible for the safety and comfort of all our residents. This animal is making people uncomfortable. But he's allowed to be here by law, I said, a little more firmly this time. The Americans with Disabilities Act. Oh, I'm well aware of the so-called ADA, she interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. But HOA bylaws also state that any animal deemed a nuisance can be removed from community property, and I am deeming him a nuisance. Tyler was starting to look distressed. He relied on Buster not just for sounds he couldn't hear. A knock at the door, a smoke alarm, his name being called, but for a sense of security and connection to the world. Buster was his ears, his confidence. Jake, what's going on? He signed, his movements quick and agitated. Before I could respond, Mrs. Henderson did something I genuinely couldn't believe. She reached down and unclipped Buster's leash from Tyler's hand. Hey! I yelled, louder than I intended. Several heads whipped around. This animal needs to be contained, she stated, her voice rising to match mine. She grabbed Buster's collar. Buster, bless his well-trained heart, looked confused but didn't resist, probably because Tyler hadn't given him any command to. He just looked up at Tyler with worried eyes. You can't do that, I exclaimed, stepping forward. He's a service animal. That's illegal. I am upholding the bylaws of this community, Mrs. Henderson retorted, her face flushed. She started to pull Buster away. Tyler reached for Buster, his face a mask of panic. No, Buster! He's my dog! His voice cracked. He stumbled slightly, disoriented without the familiar weight of the leash in his hand, the anchor that was Buster. It was then that I noticed them. Slightly off to the side, Near a picnic table laden with coleslaw and potato salad was a small group of people. One had a professional-looking video camera on his shoulder, pointed directly at us. Another held a microphone with a fluffy windscreen, the logo of a local news channel clearly visible. They hadn't been there a minute ago. They must have been covering the Welcome Summer event, a slow news day, I guessed. And Mrs. Henderson, in her righteous fury, hadn't noticed them at all. A crazy, desperate idea sparked in my brain. It was so out of character for me, so confrontational, that it almost made me laugh. But the sight of Tyler's stricken face and Buster being led away like contraband solidified it. "Mrs. Henderson!" I called out, my voice much stronger now, projecting towards the news crew as much as at her. "Are you aware that confiscating a registered service animal is a serious offense, especially when the local news is here to document your community spirit?" Her head snapped towards the camera. For a split second, her helmet of hair seemed to wobble. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a deflated pool toy. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The cameraman took a step closer. The reporter, a young woman with bright, intelligent eyes, was already moving towards us, microphone extended. "Ma'am," the reporter said, her voice calm but firm. "Could you explain what's happening here? Are you taking this man's service dog?" Mrs. Henderson looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a very large, very public truck. She still had a grip on Buster's collar, but her confidence had vanished. Buster, meanwhile, was whining softly, looking desperately back at Tyler. Tyler, seeing the camera, seemed to understand what I was doing. He straightened up, his expression shifting from panic to a kind of determined resolve I'd rarely seen in him. "She's taking my hearing dog," he signed clearly, looking directly at the camera, then speaking the words aloud for emphasis. "She says he's a nuisance." The reporter's eyebrows shot up. She turned the microphone to me. "Sir, can you tell us your side of the story?" This was it. My moment to be that guy who stands up, who fights back. My stomach was doing gymnastics, but I thought of Tyler, of Buster, of all the times I'd backed down. Not this time. "My side of the story?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady as the camera lens felt like it was boring into my soul. "My cousin Tyler is deaf. Buster is his highly trained hearing dog. We just moved in today. Mrs. Henderson, the HOA president, decided Buster was a nuisance, despite him being leashed and perfectly behaved, and took him. That's not just against HOA rules, that's against the law." The reporter turned back to Mrs. Henderson, whose face was now a fascinating shade of mottled pink. "Mrs. Henderson, do you have a response to that? Are you aware of the laws protecting service animals?" Mrs. Henderson sputtered. Well, the bylaws. Community comfort." She looked wildly around, as if hoping a sinkhole would conveniently open up and swallow her, the camera crew, and maybe Buster, too. Buster, meanwhile, gave a little yelp and strained against her grip, trying to get back to Tyler. Tyler took a step towards him, his hand outstretched. "Buster, it's okay, boy." "It's clear the dog is distressed," the reporter noted, her gaze sharp. "And so is his owner." A small crowd had gathered now, their burgers and hot dogs forgotten. The murmur of their voices was a low hum in the background. Some looked sympathetic, others just plain curious. I spotted a few of my new neighbors, the ones who had given me polite, if wary, nods earlier. Their expressions were unreadable. "I am simply trying to maintain order," Mrs. Henderson finally managed, her voice a little shrill. This animal he was upsetting the children." "Which children?" I challenged, stepping forward a bit more, putting myself between her and Tyler. "The ones who were asking to pet him, or are there other invisible children we should be aware of?" My voice was laced with sarcasm, a tone I rarely used, but it felt surprisingly good. A woman in the crowd, holding a little girl's hand, spoke up. "My Maisie loved the doggy. She wasn't scared at all." Maisie nodded vigorously, chocolate ice cream smeared around her mouth. Mrs. Henderson shot the woman a look that could curdle milk. The reporter seized on it. "So, it seems not everyone agrees with your assessment, Mrs. Henderson. What specific action did the dog take that you deemed a nuisance?" Checkmate. Buster had done nothing but exist, wag his tail, and be a good boy. Mrs. Henderson opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had nothing. "Look," I said, trying a slightly more conciliatory tone, though my insides were still churning with adrenaline. "We don't want any trouble. Tyler just needs his dog. Buster helps him live independently. Taking him away is like taking someone's wheelchair or glasses." I looked at Tyler, who nodded, his eyes fixed on Buster. The cameraman zoomed in on Tyler, then on Buster, then on Mrs. Henderson's increasingly flustered face. This was television gold, apparently. Mrs. Henderson's grip on Buster's collar seemed to loosen slightly. She was cornered, and she knew it. The authority she wielded so easily in emails and sternly worded notices was crumbling under the public scrutiny and the unblinking eye of the camera. "Perhaps," the reporter suggested smoothly, "it would be best to return the dog to his owner while we clarify the situation." Mrs. Henderson looked at the reporter, then at me, then at the crowd. Her shoulders slumped a little. Defeat was written all over her face. With a huff that seemed to deflate her entire upper body, she unceremoniously shoved Buster's leash back towards Tyler. Buster didn't wait for the handoff. He leaped forward, licking Tyler's hands, his whole body wiggling with relief. Tyler knelt, burying his face in Buster's fur, murmuring reassurances. It was a reunion that tugged at even my cynical heartstrings. The crowd let out a collective awe. Even the reporter cracked a small smile. Mrs. Henderson, however, looked like she'd just swallowed a lemon whole. She mumbled something about misunderstanding and overzealousness in protecting the community. Then, without another word, turned and practically fled towards the dessert table, grabbing a brownie as if it were a life raft. "Well," the reporter said, turning back to me and Tyler, "it seems this situation has been resolved. For now." She looked genuinely interested. "Tyler, Jake, would you be willing to tell us a bit more about the importance of hearing dogs and the challenges you face?" Tyler looked at me. I nodded. This was an opportunity. "Yes," Tyler signed, then said aloud, "I'd like that." The next half hour was a blur. We talked about Tyler's experience, about Buster's training, about the rights of people with disabilities. Buster, now calm and happy by Tyler's side, occasionally offered a paw or a well-timed head nudge, as if to emphasize a point. The news crew was professional and respectful, asking intelligent questions. I even managed to crack a joke or two, feeling a surprising sense of confidence. The guy who normally avoided confrontation at all costs had just gone head-to-head with HOA Karen, on camera, and won. It was exhilarating. As the crew packed up, the reporter thanked us. "This will likely air on the 6 o'clock news," she said. "Maybe even the 11. It's a good human interest piece, and it raises awareness." After they left, a few neighbors came over. Not to complain, but to apologize for Mrs. Henderson's behavior. "She can be a bit much," one man said, shaking his head. "Good on you for standing up to her." "That dog is beautiful," a woman added, "and clearly very important to your cousin." It felt like a small victory, but a significant one. Maybe Harmony Glen wasn't so bad after all. Maybe it just needed a little shaking up. As we walked back to our townhouse, Buster trotting contentedly between us, Tyler bumped my shoulder. "You were pretty awesome back there," he signed, a proud grin on his face. I shrugged, trying to look modest. but inside I was beaming. Just doing what needed to be done. No, really, he insisted. You were like a superhero. HOA man. I laughed. Hardly, but I guess even a pushover has his limits. We got back to the house, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, replaced by a weary satisfaction. I figured that was the end of it. Mrs. Henderson had been publicly embarrassed. We had Buster back. Life could return to its beige Harmony Glen normal. I couldn't have been more wrong. The storm was just beginning. The 6 o'clock news segment was something. It started with cheerful footage of the welcome summer barbecue, kids laughing, burgers sizzling. Then bam, the confrontation. Mrs. Henderson, looking like a startled bulldog. Me, surprisingly articulate. Tyler, calm and dignified, signing passionately about Buster. And Buster, of course, stole the show with his worried whimpers and joyful reunion. The reporter had framed it perfectly. Local HOA president oversteps, attempts to confiscate deaf man's service animal. They even had a short interview with a disability rights lawyer who confirmed that, yes, what Mrs. Henderson did was highly questionable, if not outright illegal. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. First, it was my mom. "Jake, I just saw you on TV. Are you okay? Is Tyler okay? That poor dog?" Then came texts from friends I hadn't heard from in ages. "Dude, you're famous!" And, "Way to take down the Karen." The Harmony Glen community Facebook page exploded. Some defended Mrs. Henderson, muttering about rules and context the news left out. But the overwhelming majority were on our side. People shared stories of their own run-ins with Mrs. Henderson's zealotry. There were calls for her resignation. Memes started appearing. Mrs. Henderson with dog napper goggles, Buster wearing a superhero cape. It was surreal. Tyler was initially overwhelmed by the attention, but then started to see the positive. "People are learning," he signed, scrolling through supportive comments. "This is good, right?" "It's definitely raising awareness," I agreed. Though a part of me, the conflict-avoidant part, was cringing at being the center of so much drama. The next morning there was a letter taped to our door. Official HOA letterhead. My stomach dropped. It was a formal notice. Not an apology, as a sane person might expect. Oh no, it was a list of alleged violations. Violation 1. Unapproved animal on premises, it read. Apparently, despite the on-camera takedown, Mrs. Henderson was doubling down. Service animal status pending verification by the HOA board. Violation 2. Causing a public disturbance. That was rich. Violation 3. Failure to immediately comply with directives from an HOA official. And the kicker. A hearing will be scheduled to determine appropriate fines and further actions, up to and including a formal request for removal of the animal from Harmony Glen. I stared at the letter, dumbfounded. She can't be serious. "What is it?" Tyler asked, coming up behind me. I handed him the letter. As he read it, his face hardened. "She's trying to kick Buster out?" he signed, his eyes flashing with anger. "After everything?" "This is insane," I said, pacing the small living room. "She was humiliated on the news. Why would she do this?" "Power," Tyler said, his voice tight. "She doesn't like being challenged." He was right. This wasn't about Buster anymore. This was about Mrs. Henderson reasserting her dominance, proving she couldn't be beaten, even by facts, laws, or public opinion. My initial instinct was to find a way to smooth things over. Maybe a polite letter? An offer to, I don't know, bake her some apology cookies? But then I looked at Tyler's face, the worry lines etched around his eyes, and the thought of Buster, so loyal and essential, being threatened. The flicker of spine I'd felt yesterday ignited again. No, I said, surprising myself. We're not backing down. She wants a fight? She's got one. Tyler looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. HOA man strikes again? I grinned back. Something like that. First, I called the news reporter. She was very interested to hear about the HOA's latest move. So, instead of an apology, she's escalating? That's quite the follow-up story, she said, a note of excitement in her voice. We might want to be at that hearing. Next, I started researching. HOA law, ADA regulations, precedents for service animal disputes. The internet is a wonderful, terrifying place. I found online forums filled with people battling overzealous HOAs. I learned about harassment, discrimination, and the surprising power of a well-documented paper trail. We also started talking to our neighbors, the ones who had been supportive. We asked if they'd be willing to write letters to speak at the hearing. Many agreed. Mrs. Henderson, it turned out, had alienated a lot of people over the years with her petty tyrannies over lawn gnome placement and recycling bin etiquette. The hearing was scheduled for the following week in the community clubhouse, the very same place where the barbecue disaster had occurred. The irony was not lost on me. The days leading up to it were tense. Mrs. Henderson was a ghost, no more public appearances, but I could feel her presence, like a malevolent garden gnome watching from the shadows. We received a few more passive-aggressive notes, a reminder about lawn maintenance. My grass was a quarter-inch too long, apparently. A flyer about responsible pet ownership, with the section on nuisance animals helpfully highlighted. Tyler was stressed, but also determined. He spent hours with Buster, practicing commands, ensuring he was impeccably behaved. Buster, oblivious to the drama he was at the center of, was just happy for the extra attention and treats. I, on the other hand, was a wreck. I wasn't sleeping well. I kept replaying the confrontation in my head, imagining all the ways the hearing could go wrong. What if the board sided with her? What if we did have to give up Buster? The thought was unbearable. This was so far outside my comfort zone, I couldn't even see my comfort zone from here. It was somewhere back on the horizon, a tiny beige speck. The evening before the hearing, Tyler found me hunched over my laptop, surrounded by printouts of legal jargon. "You okay?" he signed. I sighed. "Just nervous. What if I mess this up, Ty? I'm not good at this stuff." Tyler put a hand on my shoulder. "You were good at the barbecue. You stood up for us. For Buster." He paused, then signed, "I trust you, Jake." His simple words hit me harder than any legal threat from the HOA. I looked at him, my cousin, who had faced so much adversity with quiet strength. And I looked at Buster, who rested his head on Tyler's knee, gazing up with absolute trust. They believed in me. Maybe it was time I believed in myself a little too. The community clubhouse was packed. It seemed half of Harmony Glen had turned out for the HOA hearing. And, true to her word, the news reporter and her cameraman were there, setting up discreetly in the back. Mrs. Henderson, seated at a long table with the other 4 board members, shot them a venomous glare, but said nothing. She looked smaller, somehow, without her clipboard and visor. The board president, a mild-mannered man named Mr. Abernathy, who usually dealt with complaints about overgrown hedges, cleared his throat. "This hearing of the Harmony Glen Homeowners Association is now in session. The matter before us, alleged violations by resident Jake Miller concerning an animal, to wit, a dog named Buster." My heart was pounding like a drum solo. I sat at a small table opposite the board, Tyler beside me, Buster lying patiently at his feet. I had a stack of papers in front of me. Copies of Buster's service animal certification, printouts of ADA guidelines, supportive letters from neighbors, even a still from the news broadcast showing Buster's impeccable behavior before Mrs. Henderson accosted us. Mrs. Henderson presented her case first. She painted a picture of chaos and fear, of an aggressive, uncontrolled animal terrorizing the community. It was a masterpiece of fiction. She claimed children were screaming, adults were fleeing, and that Buster had lunged at her. The cameraman in the back subtly zoomed in on her as she said this. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath. I'd rehearsed this, but my voice still trembled a bit as I started. Mr. Abernathy, members of the board, my name is Jake Miller. This is my cousin Tyler and his certified hearing dog, Buster. I laid out the facts, calmly and clearly. I explained Tyler's deafness, Buster's crucial role, the laws protecting service animals. I presented our documentation, then I addressed Mrs. Henderson's accusations directly. Mrs. Henderson claims Buster was a nuisance, yet we have video evidence from Channel 4 News, which I'm happy to play, showing Buster calm and leashed until Mrs. Henderson illegally confiscated him. I held up a printed screenshot. She claims children were scared, yet several parents here today can testify their children enjoyed Buster's presence. Mrs. Smith, would you mind? Mrs. Smith, Maisie's mom, stood up. Buster was a perfect gentleman. My daughter adored him. Mrs. Henderson is mistaken, or not telling the truth. One by one, other neighbors stood up, offering their support, refuting Mrs. Henderson's claims. It was like a scene from a movie. The one where the underdog finally gets his day. Then Tyler spoke. He used ASL, with me interpreting, but his voice, when he chose to use it, was strong and clear. He spoke about what Buster meant to him, how the dog was not a pet, but a lifeline. He looked directly at the board, then at Mrs. Henderson. Taking Buster away from me wouldn't just be taking a dog, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It would be taking my independence, my safety. It would be discrimination. The room was silent, save for the quiet whir of the news camera. When he finished, even Mr. Abernathy looked moved. He looked at Mrs. Henderson. Diane, he said, his tone weary. Do you have any actual evidence, beyond your personal opinion, that this dog is a nuisance or a threat? Mrs. Henderson opened her mouth, then closed it. Her face was pale. She looked at the board members, who were pointedly avoiding her gaze. She looked at the crowd, at the news camera. She had nothing. No allies, no evidence, no credibility left. Mr. Abernathy sighed. In light of the evidence presented, and the lack of credible counter-evidence, the board finds no grounds for the violations cited against Mr. Miller and his service animal, Buster. All charges are dismissed. A wave of applause and cheers swept through the room. Tyler grabbed my arm, his face lit up with a huge grin. Buster, sensing the mood, let out a happy woof, which only made people cheer louder. Mr. Abernathy banged his gavel. Furthermore, he continued, looking sternly at Mrs. Henderson, the board will be reviewing the conduct of the HOA president in this matter. Confiscating a service animal is a serious issue, and we will be considering appropriate actions, including sensitivity training and a formal review of her position. Mrs. Henderson looked like she might actually faint. She gathered her papers, her hands shaking, and without a word, practically ran from the room, the news camera following her retreat. Later, as we were surrounded by well-wishers, the reporter came up. "Congratulations," she said. "Looks like you really did make a difference in Harmony Glen." "We just wanted to live peacefully," I said, "and for Tyler to have his dog." "And for HOAs to follow the law," Tyler signed, smiling. The news segment that night was even better. It was a story of community, of standing up for what's right, of a very good dog and his devoted owner. Harmony Glen, for a brief moment, was famous for something other than its perfectly manicured lawns. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Mrs. Henderson did indeed undergo sensitivity training. She also quietly resigned as HOA president a month later, citing personal reasons. The new HOA president, Mr. Abernathy, was far more reasonable. The Welcome Summer barbecue the following year had a special Pets Welcome on Leash section, and Buster was the guest of honor. I even found myself joining a neighborhood committee, me, Jake, the conflict avoider. Turns out when you fight for something you believe in and win, it changes you. I still wouldn't call myself HOA man, but I wasn't a pushover anymore. Tyler thrived. His job was going well. He made friends in the neighborhood, and with Buster by his side, he navigated the world with a new confidence. Harmony Glen, despite its beige beginnings, had become a real home for him. For both of us. Sometimes I'd see Mrs. Henderson walking her perfectly coiffed poodle, always on a leash, of course. She'd never make eye contact, and that was fine by me. Life in Harmony Glen wasn't always perfectly harmonious. But it was ours. And Buster, our four-legged hero, made sure we always heard the important things, like the doorbell, the smoke alarm, and the quiet, steady beat of a community finally learning to listen. And every now and then, when no one was looking, I'd swear Buster would give me a knowing wink, as if to say, "See? Sometimes you just gotta bark a little louder." And he'd be right.